My name is Gökçe Günel and I'm an associate professor of anthropology at Rice University. Most of my research looks at how infrastructure transforms in the face of climate change and energy-related challenges. So I wrote a book called Spaceship in the Desert, which studied the UAE's renewable energy and clean technology efforts and asked how do oil-rich economies prepare for a future beyond oil. You can think about extraction in two very broad ways. One is the very material process of exploiting natural resources and building the infrastructure that's necessary to exploit those natural resources. The second definition is the more conceptual one, where you can think about an unequal processes of exchange that happen between various communities.
If I have to define extraction, it's something that is taken forcefully. And that force does not even have to be like this very absolute force. It could be structural forces. So here, for me, it would be capitalist extraction, patriarchy as an extraction from women's body.
The question being like how extraction comes up in my research, I think the first thing that comes to mind is looking at this historical and archival legacy, or the more like prominent one, which is this idea of labor extraction, where for a lot of Asian Americans, or Asian immigrants entering the country back in the 1800s and early 1900s, a lot of the reason why they were coming was because of labor.
In our ethnographic research methods class, we try to think about how power differences between the researcher and the research subjects shape the ways in which our projects are designed. This is a sort of a workshop style class where each class meeting is organized around one specific tool or one specific question in regards to ethnographic research methods in particular. We try to emphasize that these methods need to respond to sort of ethical concerns and need to identify the kinds of priorities that our research collaborators, sort of people who are in part of the communities that we study have. And in sort of studying research methods, we try to understand the kinds of power relations that define our research framework. So for instance, how does your interview experience change if you're interviewing someone who is, say, much more powerful than you?
I think extraction goes really well with my class and the work I'm doing outside of class. So it just so happened that I'm actually a student community project leader with Harris County government, specifically their Office of Sustainability. And so I'm actually using the work I'm doing there as sort of like the ethnographic research I'm doing for this class, in which I reach out to the most disadvantaged and environmentally challenged communities in Harris County. And we're meeting with focus groups where basically I'm going to ask them, some questions, conduct interviews and say, hey, are you aware that you guys are one of the most environmentally challenged communities,
Extraction is a very important subject in the research that I do because I work with a laboring community in India, and this laboring community is basically that of marginalized women, Dalit and tribal communities. And what I'm basically trying to do in my research is understand how there is a sort of a biological extraction that is taking place in terms of labor. So I'm looking at it from a very bodily aspect of how labor is expropriated from these women, and what are the social processes that goes into that expropriation.
And so I think if we think about extraction as just this sort of like power imbalance between two parties, one in which has more authority and specifically like control over the actions or life experiences of the other party, I would say just in sort of that implicit way, there's a lot of that, especially when we look at just racial dynamics in the US.
I think it's very important to understand the kinds of sensitivities that are embedded into these methods and to sort of try to ask how the context and how the subject matters of these interviews would shape the kinds of outcomes that we can have.